Hi, I'm Adam Culp, and you're at Beachcasts. Today, we're going to be talking about using Doctrine ORM to create relationships in a bi-directional sort of way. So stick around, and we'll get right on that. All right, so as I said, we're going to be dealing with Doctrine ORM today. We're going to be setting up a relationship. Now, what I've done, if you have any questions or if you want to see how to use the code base or what have you, please go back to the previous episodes. I'll link to those up above, so that way you can go back and view the previous episodes of how we've set up this project up until now. Today, we're going to be dealing only with the relationship. Now, for those of you who have been following along, what I've done is I've included a new module. So in the code, if we look in the code, we'll see that we actually have the announcements, banks, and in branches module. Now previously, in previous episodes, we set up the announcements module, then we set up the banks module, and we also set up a one-to-many relationship from one bank to another, where a bank could have a child bank or a parent bank. And we set that up in a previous episode. In this one, we're going to be using branches, and we're going to set it up to have associations with the banks. Now, we're going to do this using Doctrine ORM. If you have not used Doctrine ORM, please give it a try. Check it out. Back to the editor. So we see we have it's making this scratch is making a GET request to localhost :8080, so port 8080, and it's calling the branches, the branches path, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and execute that. I get my database out of the way, execute that, and we'll see that it does do the HTTP request. We got back a response code 200 OK, and we also see the data that we received back, and it is a list of branches. So we have branch 1. We have branch 2, and so forth. Now, you'll notice one of the things that we have in the data here is a bank ID. So obviously, we're expecting a bank, the branch to be associated with the bank somehow. And in the database, we also have that, right? So if we go in the database, we extend branches, we see that there is bank ID here. It is an int 11 that we're expecting to associate these branches with the bank. And what we need to do is we need to now create that association. So I'm going to start off with the branch entity. So let me extend out branches and get to the entity and open up the branch entity. Now here in the branch entity, one of the first things that I want to do, because we are going to be associating this with the bank entity, we want to first off make sure we build the association to the bank entity. So I need to do the import. Oh. And we want to call in the banks entity bank. There we go. So now we have that imported in, so that way we can use any parts of that we might need throughout our branch entity. And then we want to create a new field. Now we have the field for bank ID here. We don't really need that. I'm going to leave it there just for redundancy's sake, as a bit of documentation. But what we need to do instead is we need to create a field for bank. That way the branch will have a bank field. And so what that's going to look like is this, where we've created the many branches will have one bank, right? And we're creating a many-to-one relationship. Creating the many-to-one relationship, of course, the target is the bank entity, and we're inversing that by branches. So in the bank entity, we're expecting to find branches, and so we're going to have to create that as well. But for now, we're only creating bank, and it's going to point over to the bank entity. Now, after we've got that, so now we've got the association put in the entity, right? Now that we've got the bank field put into our entity, one of the things we want to do is set up a way for this entity to get the bank, right? We need to be able to get the bank. So we're going to, in our getBranch method, so getBranch is a method that we create so that way we can query against it, right? So so that our method is like, for instance, a read method. Rather than returning the entire data set from the database, I like to create this get method within my entities that basically reaches out and gets all the data that I might want. It's important to do this because, for instance, if I was to pull raw data from the database, what happens if it's a users table, right? There might be password in there. I don't want to retrieve that. I don't want to retrieve it and put it back out into an API or something like that. So what I'll do is I'll create a nice safe method like this that gets only the fields that I'm expecting to return back. Now in this case, because we are associating the bank, one of the things that we'll want to do is we will want to make sure that we're getting the bank and putting it out into our record set as well. So what I would do in this case, I might not always want that, right? When I get branch, I might not always want the bank. I might just want the branch information, but I might want to also be able to get a multi-dimensional type structure that shows me the bank associated with the branch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set in a variable here, or an argument to the method. And by default, I'm going to make that false, and I'm going to call that variable recursive. So basically what that's going to do, what I'm planning to use that for, is anytime I call the getBranch method, if I pass true as an argument, it's going to be recursive, and then it'll give me the bank information as well. Otherwise, if I don't pass an argument, or if I pass an argument as false, you know, it's not going to give me the bank information. But anyway, I want to set that up. So now what I'm going to do with that is down here, after I've returned the base branch information, then I'm going to have an if condition down here, and it's going to look for recursive, and it's going to say if recursive is set, then we want to add an item. So now we're going to add bank into the array. And now in order to get that, then we need to call a method getBank, because we need to be able to get the bank. Now, of course, bank it's not actually in our database under the branch record. We would have to go to the bank to get that. And that's why we wanted to add our use statement early on, and is to make sure that we're pulling in the bank entity, because we need to actually call through and get that. So anyway, this method, if it's set to recursive true, we're then going to populate it with the bank information. Now to do that, we're going to need to set in some additional supporting methods here, right? So down here we have our get ID. Let's see, we have our get ID. I want to add in a method here to go along with what we just created, and that is add in a method for getBank. Now, if the getBank is being called, as it is up above, then we're going to use the bank entity, and we're going to call the method getBank. Right, so we're going to call the bank method and call getBank. Now, that's not going to work at the moment because we haven't actually created a collection or anything with it, but we will be doing that. Now, on the other hand, along with a getBank method, if we're querying for data, we also need to set the bank, right? Because now that we've got, you might remember in the data I showed you there was a bank underscore ID field. Well, that was being populated because there was no association, and I was just throwing data in that field, and the entity was happily doing it. However, now there's a relationship involved. When you build an association, it's expecting you to then pass not just the ID to populate that field, but rather to pull in the bank object, and then it gets the ID and populates that field off of that. So what we need to then do is we need to have a set bank method. And so we're going to go ahead and create that. So we're creating a set bank method. It's expecting a bank object. So we're going to pass in this case, when this is being called, we're going to pass in the argument for bank, and it's expecting the bank object to be passed in. And it's going to set this bank to this bank object. So that way the entity will be able to populate the field. Now, without that, it's not going to populate that bank ID in the branch. So it's very important that we get that set in there. All right, so that's really all we need for the moment in our branch entity. However, things aren't working. There's a lot more to do in setting up an association like we've done here. But we're done with the branch method for now. We've created a field for bank. We've added to our querying, so now we can get the bank information as well as our branch information and any queries that we want to run. And we've also got a way to set the bank ID, so that way the entity will be inserting it into the database along with bank information, right? So the next thing we need to do is go back and update our bank entity, because any association has to be both ways. If we created the association from branch, we also have to create the matching association in the bank. So to do that, the first thing we want to do is in our bank entity, we also need to import the branch, right? So we want to import the branch. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in here. And so we've added in a call to branches, the entity, the branch class, right? So now we've got the entity imported in so we can use it throughout this method. Now, in previous videos, we set up this, which is your parent ID or your parent and your children, right? But now we've got a new bit of information we need to set in here. Not only do we need parent and children, we also need branches, because there might be multiple branches. So we're going to add in a field for our branches, so that way as we're querying, we're now going to be able to pull that information as well. And that is set up as a one-to-many relationship. We have a one-to-many relationship. Our target entity is the branch entity, and we're going to map it by bank. Now remember, in the branch entity, we created the field bank, right? And so if we scroll up here, we see that we created the field bank, and that is inversed by branches. In the bank, we're creating branches, and it is mapped by bank. So that's our relationship. That's our association. So now we've got that created. So the association right now is somewhat functional. We have one step left to do for that association to work, and that is, because there are many branches possibly for a bank, we need to create a collection to be able to handle that. Now you remember we did the same thing with children in the last video, because there possibly could be many children to a bank. In this case, there's also going to be many branches. So we need to add in a collection for our branches, just like we did for the children. So I'm adding that here. Now we've got this branches, and we're using array collection to be able to populate that. All right, so at this time, that association is functional, right? It knows where to find the data. It knows what to do. However, another thing that we need to do is we need to add in a method. You might recall in branches, when we were setting up here, when we make a call to this getBank, right? We call this getBank, and it is expecting to be able to call getBank, so that way it can reach out to the bank entity, pull that bank information, and then insert it into the branches table as a bank ID. So we need to create that method, getBank. Now with the getBank method, what I've done here is I've created two arguments. First, I have a withParents argument, and then I have a withChildren argument. And this enables me, as I'm querying, as I'm getting data from getBank, I'm able to say, okay, give me it with the parents, give me it with the children, or don't give me it with anything, right? So as you can see here, we populate the bank array with information about the bank. Now, if the withParent Boolean is set, then it calls out to getParent and it populates a parent node in the array with that information, and the same thing for children. But what I need to do now is I need to augment this a little bit, because now I don't just have withParent or withChildren. I need to also be able to say, withBranch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in another argument for this and say, okay, now there's a possibility I might just want to getBranch. Now I'm going to clean this up a little bit, because as we're getting more arguments, I just want to make that a little bit cleaner. Okay, so now what we've got is with getBank, we've got withParent, withChild, and withBranches, and we can pass Boolean flags to say yes or no. Include those when you give me the data. But now that we have this, we need to now create the array portion, right? So we have withParents if condition here, we have withChildren if condition there. I'm going to add in another if condition, and that is going to then say if it's set withBranches, then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and set branches and go that way. Now, of course, the count of the branches needs to be bigger than 0, as well as the branch Boolean being set before it's going to populate it. Otherwise, we would probably end up with errors, right? And then of course, we make calls to withBranch the same as we do with parent and children, but we now need to create that method, right? Because we don't really have a getBranch method. We haven't used that. So now let's scroll down here, and we're going to create that method. So we have here we have withChildren, getChildren, getParent, setParent. I think I'm missing a method there. All right, but either way, I do need to create my method for withBranches. So got withChildren, which withChildren calls getChildren, right? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in this new method for withBranch. And if it's withBranch, which we'll know because it was passed, we're going to pass the Boolean flag with it. If it's set, then we're going to map the branches entity to here, and then by doing so, we're returning the array. And now, if not, if this hasn't been set correctly, then we're only going to pass an array item for cParent. It's just a little bit cleaner that way. But either way, this allows us now to then put the branch into the data set. So we can have a multi-dimensional structure, and we can dictate whether it has children, whether it has parents, whether it has branches represented in the structure. Just a little bit cleaner. Now, another thing that we want to do is we want to make a way to return the branches, right? Not only do we have withBranches, but we also want a way to return the branches. So we have to have a getBranches method where we're calling the collection, and this is going to enable us to output the branches. Okay. So now that we've got that, we've got our everything set up here as far as the data goes. Let's see, we've got bank, we do getBank. Just want to make sure I'm passing in my arguments right. We have getBank. Now, one thing that I don't have here is, now when I do getBank, I'm not passing the Boolean flags there, because in this case, in the branch entity, if I'm calling getBank, it's because I've already got the branch, right? I only want to get the bank one time. I don't want it to recursively then give me the, any bank could possibly have branches. And then if it calls the branches, then the branches are called the parent. We'd end up with an infinite loop of getting data, and we don't want that. So that's why we're not passing any arguments when we call getBranch or when we call getBank from the branches, because we don't want it to be recursive at all. We just want the bank associated with this branch. Okay, so we've got that. So we should be set to go. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we now need to update our handlers to be able to take advantage of this association that we created here, right? So I'm going to go into, I'm only going to do one for the sake of this video, and then maybe in another video I'll update some other ones. But in this one, I'm going to go into my handler. My read handler. And in the read handler, you'll notice here that in my handle method, I'm building the entity, I'm calling the repository, and I'm pulling a find, and I'm passing the ID into the find, right? So that's how I'm finding my entity. And then I'm telling it, use the method getBranch, because again, I don't want it to pull everything. I want it to pull what the getBranch says that it should pull. However, in this case, I've not passed any arguments, so it's going to just give me the branch. It's not going to give me the bank information. Let's test this just to see if that is actually the way it's working, because that's the way it should be working. All right, so branches read, and we'll do number 2. Let's pull up the data here real quick. So if I use the database, double click on branches, we can see I do have 3 branches in the database, ID 1, ID 2, ID 3. So if I do ID 2, that should be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and run it, and it comes back okay. So I've got my ID, my bank ID, that's all here. And you'll notice it's just a single branch. That's all we're expecting in the read handler. Now, if I come over here, make this smaller. If I come over here and in the getBranch method, as I'm calling it, if I put in true, right, then that's going to, oh, I only need 1 true. If I put in true, what that's going to do is in my branch, in my getBranch, recursive true is going to set the recursive flag, and that recursive flag is then going to call the bank if everything works correctly. So let's see. Now that I've set that to true, let's run this again, and we got back our record set, and sure enough, there we go. We've got our branch information, and we also have our bank information all represented there. Of course, if I change this back to being false or empty, doesn't matter. False and empty are the same thing because I set the default value as false. Run this again. And now I only get the branch information and not the bank information. And so now the association is set. We're all ready to go. Our create method is already set too. If I was to create a new branch, it would create the bank along with it because of how we configured everything. So that is how you set up a Doctrine ORM many-to-one or one-to-many relationship between various entities. I hope you got a good bit out of that. And if you have any questions, please post them. Remember, leave some comments down below. Tell me how you liked the video. Put any questions down there you might have. If you have suggestions for future videos, please put them there. In future episodes, I'll come back and include some best practices with some of these things. Now, one of the things I do want to cover really quickly here. So you might notice that as I created these relationships, I'm not really telling it. For instance, when I create the many-to-one relationship in the branch to the bank and the same thing in the bank, you'll notice that I didn't tell it what fields to use as a relationship. Now, I could have put in an additional parameter here in the doc block to tell it how the foreign keys should map up. But in this case, because the bank underscore ID is already the same as the entity I'm mapping to, just with underscore ID, convention in Doctrine ORM automatically maps those up for us. I don't have to do that. Now, if my foreign key field was named differently than the entity, then of course I would have to specify that here, but I don't have to in this case. So again, Please subscribe to the video, tell your friends about Beachcasts so they can come and check us out too. And I really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.